Hi, David.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV. This is The Wright Show. You are David Korn and Mother Jones, and you must be tired. Orchestrating a brouhaha is a
Brouhaha?
tough. Oh, it is totally graduated from a kerfuffle to a brouhaha, I would say. You, of course, you co-authored this article in Mother Jones. Bill O'Reilly has his own Brian Williams problem. The rest is history. Now it's all over the front pages, as we used to say. And I guess one question is, why pick on a nice guy like Bill O'Reilly, David?
You got me there. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it. We can just stop here.
I mean, has he ever?
No. I mean, the issue is, if you look at the story, the first paragraph notes that after Brian Williams was suspended by NBC, O'Reilly went on a tear, and he basically said this is indicative of what's wrong with the left-wing, mainstream media, that it disseminates distortions over and over again, deceptions, and Brian Williams was just one out of many, and this should cause the whole media to look at itself and sort of get straight. And it seemed to me, at the same time that he was doing that, somebody had approached me and said, I have a clip here, a column that Bill O'Reilly wrote 10 years ago in which he claimed he was in a combat situation in Argentina. My understanding is he wasn't. And that was all that this person put in front of me, someone who was not from a rival network, not from a political outfit. And so we started looking at that. It wasn't, I have to say, it wasn't my original idea to vet Bill O'Reilly's previous statements. But in light of what he was saying about Brian Williams and what it meant for the whole media, we found that some of his own assertions about his wartime reporting experiences were at odds with the factual record. Yeah. So that's really how it began. It was, we didn't decide to pick on Bill O'Reilly. Someone, pointed me in this direction, and it turned out that what the person's hunch was true.
Yeah. It's weird. In one venue, O'Reilly kind of expressed sympathy for Williams. I mean, I guess maybe when he's talking to his base, he goes all out on Williams in the liberal media. But I saw one appearance where it almost made me wonder, has he had issues like this? Because he was so sympathetic, and he was like, people who are enjoying this are horrible.
That was on the Jimmy Kimmel show, and he basically came out and said, anyone who's enjoying the destruction of a man, well, there's something wrong with you. And that was a really, I think, stand-up type of thing to say. And I said, and that surprised me a little bit. I didn't think that, that he was doing that because he had any concerns about himself when I saw it at the time. But later on, as I noted earlier, again, please, people, don't take my word for anything I say today. Go to the story, look at the link. It's Bill O'Reilly in his own words going on about the media. And the thing is, in his Bill O'Reilly revolving truth fashion, he has attacked our story by saying that we accused him of hammering Brian Williams, and he points to this Jimmy Kimmel appearance to show that we're wrong about that, so therefore everything else is wrong in the story. We didn't accuse him of hammering. We said he went on a tear after Brian Williams was suspended, and later on in the piece we said he excoriated Brian Williams. As he's doing this tear, there's a whole, the whole headline behind him is Brian Williams, the press and you. Yeah. So he clearly was going on about Brian Williams and what it means in terms of left-wing media. But yes, at first he was, supportive, but when NBC suspended Brian Williams, he used it, he bashed away to make this big point about what's wrong with the mainstream media and that it's nothing except a deception perpetuating conspiracy.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems to me, pretty clear cut that he got some stuff wrong. And I'm wondering if it's frustrating for you. I've read these stories in various outlets, the main media outlets, the New York Times and so on. And I generally don't see anywhere where they do a he said, she said in the vaguest kind of terms. I don't see anywhere where they say okay, he said I was in a war zone in Argentina, in the Falklands, and He wasn't. That part
Yeah.
is like totally clear. We know what the Falklands are. They're 1,200 miles from Buenos Aires, where this protest was that he says was combat. Like, I'm just, is it,
Yeah.
is it frustrating? I mean, have you been, what do you think about the coverage?
I have been frustrated in the way that so much of the media coverage is exactly as you put it, shoved into a he said template. And that so, a lot of folks initially covering this will say Mother Jones alleges that Bill O'Reilly said he was in the Falklands. We didn't allege this.
Right.
We have video in the story of the quote you just said, I was in a war zone in Argentina and the Falklands. We have other quotes from his own books and from other Bill O'Reilly shows, again, some of them with video, saying that Bill O'Reilly said he was in the Falklands. So, and then they quote Bill O'Reilly, as he said the first day out, when he wouldn't answer any of the long list of questions that we sent him before the piece ran, but as soon as it was out, he was blasting away in interview after interview after interview with media reporters, and he would get out there and say, I never said I was in the Falklands. And reporters would write, Mother Jones alleges he said he was in the Falklands.
He says he wasn't.
Says he wasn't. But yet we have tape of him saying that. So it's not, if anything, we report that he said that. Now, then you can look at the reporting and you can say, well, it's based on 10 anonymous sources, so we don't trust it. Or you can look at the reporting and say, it's Bill O'Reilly on his own show saying this. And now he says he never said it. So what's the issue of credibility here? But again and again and again, this even happened, I hate to say it, in the respected pages of the New York Times.
Well, that's where I noticed it. I read a couple of New York Times stories, and I got to say, I was just like, why don't you give us the actual facts of the case? You're the New York Times. And then after that, it's after that, right, that he threatens the New York Times reporter. Why would you threaten them when they're already, doing your work almost? I mean, I don't want to be too critical. Reporting's a tough job, but it just seems to me when the facts of the case are as clear as they are.
Well, I think, I really, I can sound like John McCain here and get off my lawn, but I do think this is a change to a certain degree on the journalistic landscape. And I was talking to a savvy media writer. I won't name this person because they can make the point themselves. Who tends not to say this, but who said that he blames it on the internet. Why? Because reporters these days, in a lot of places, the premium is on getting things up quickly and fast. If O'Reilly's calling you, and he's also calling 5 other places at the same time, you want to be the first one up with O'Reilly blasting back and calling David Corn a gutter snipe, a liar, and saying, as he did in one instance, that I should be placed in the kill zone. Getting that up and getting, the links to that and the traffic is more important than looking at what O'Reilly said and comparing it with the actual reporting and giving readers or viewers or clickers the ability to evaluate the reporting and Bill O'Reilly's counterclaims.
Yeah.
And so I was stunned that a lot of reporters actually took an interview with Bill O'Reilly, said that, in their pieces, Mother Jones alleges, Bill O'Reilly says, calls me a liar, says other awful things about me and Mother Jones and that were garbage, and then they don't call me, they don't ask for a comment or give me a reply, or even say, he says you got this wrong. What is he talking about? What's the issue here? Because I want to make sure I let people know what's really at stake. Reporters, we do that all the time, right? We call up people and we say, okay, I want to make sure I got this right. He's saying that when you said this, it's wrong, but even though I have the article, what's your case here? And no one did that.
And the funny thing is, supposedly the media has a liberal bias, and yet with Brian Williams, who is not clearly conservative like Bill O'Reilly, although I don't agree with people that he's clearly liberal at all, actually. Yeah. But anyway, the presumption on the right that he is. But anyway, with Brian Williams, I would say it was, if anything, the opposite. Of course, it's a different case because Brian Williams came out and said, I made a mistake. Yeah. But if you noticed how eager people were, like in the Washington Post, in Politico, to immediately use the word lying, whereas he wasn't saying he intentionally misled, and that's what the word lying means. I mean, I just thought, and also there was no tendency to doubt any conflicting sources in the case of, it just seems to me that with Williams, there was a weird kind of, jump on the bandwagon effect. And with O'Reilly, there's almost a reluctance to just say the most straightforward, obvious facts.
And, and that has been, challenging for us because, I keep saying this when people ask, the smart questions, is of course only Robert Wright can do, that Mother Jones, isn't alleging, in a lot of stories, they say Mother Jones alleges that Bill O'Reilly did this, said that, did that. We're not alleging. We're reporting, and you can challenge the reporting. You can say it doesn't mean much. It doesn't support. The only statement we made at the beginning of this was that he has told stories that don't stand up fully to scrutiny. I forget even what the language was, but we never said he was lying. We didn't say we didn't use the word exaggerate or embellish. Those are all words chosen by others. But it gets shorthanded by the media to Mother Jones alleged Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton. That's a little slip there. That Bill O'Reilly lied, and Bill O'Reilly calls Mother Jones liars. It's it's really not an accurate depiction of what's going on here. And to date, Bill O'Reilly and all of his conservative champions out there, not one has identified a single error in our story. While I could, waste the rest of our time on the show here just going through some of Bill O'Reilly's responses and showing just how they are factually incorrect.
Yeah. Now, here's an interesting question. Would it matter if the media were doing its job more vigorously? In other words, let's imagine that the New York Times really doubles down. And I would kind of expect that because, after all, he has now tried to intimidate him by saying, I'm threatening, he said, this is a threat. If your reporting is not accurate by my definition, there will be consequences, right? If I were the New York Times...
He said, I might come after you with everything I have. And then, to make it clear, he said, this is a threat.
Right.
So
yeah.
there's no liberal mainstream media interpretation going on here.
Right. And so I think the average self-respecting news organization says, okay, this is war, right? I mean, we're not going to take this. Let's get the facts out there clearly. And let's imagine that happened. And on the front page of the New York Times, you had column A, what the videotape shows, column B, what Bill Wright. Let's imagine. Yeah. My question is, would it matter, given that A, he's not a straight news reporter the way Brian Williams is, but more important, Fox News and NBC have different places in the media ecosystem and different conceptions of what they want to do. Would it matter if...
And it's an important word. Different standards.
Yeah, corresponding to the fact that one is very self-consciously ideological and the other is maybe allegedly ideological, but basically tries to think of itself as a straight news organization. Yeah. But would it matter? I mean, is there any amount of exposure of the actual truth here that could affect his career in an adverse way?
Well, what's the last line? The sun also rises. Isn't it pretty to think so? We don't know. And the thing is, there are folks out there writing stories saying that our story backfired. It only got him more ratings and rallied the base for him. When you do a story, when you're a journalist, you write to serve the truth and you write about stuff you think is important, and you don't know how the ball is going to bounce afterwards. And life is long. This story comes out and, people can argue about it. He can respond with bombast, denial, and insults and threatening rhetoric. And, and that's kind of red meat for his audience. And maybe it enhances his status. Maybe at the same time, it further isolates him from the rest of the media. Bill O'Reilly, it seems to me, likes to have a foot in the real world, as I might, pejoratively, put it in terms of what he thinks is real or not. But so he likes to be able to interview President Obama, and he likes to sort of, go on, the Tonight Show, and and engage with the rest of the media, while saying everybody else is wrong and only he is and Fox are right. So if enough of this stuff happens, it might isolate him from the fact-based media or the rest of the world. And a story like this, well, now people are making a fuss over a piece of work that came out I don't know, a year or two back, that shows that something he wrote in his book on the Kennedy assassination seems to be patently false, about him being at the site of a very dramatic suicide of a fellow who knew Lee Harvey Oswald, when actually, this is when he was a young cub reporter in Dallas in '77, I think, when actually he was 1,200 miles away and not at the site of
this 1,200 number keeps coming up. He was 1,200 miles away from the Falkland Islands.
It is an odd coincidence, I'll grant you that. And so, I don't know, maybe, is there a breaking point? He makes a lot of money for Fox News and Roger Ailes, and he has said things in the past that haven't been borne out. He's bullied people on air. He had a harassment suit. There are a lot of things that have come up that he's managed to survive because he's, I presume it's because he's so valuable to the place he works for. I mean, to take one small example, Robert, and unfortunately, I have to, it's about me, but we'll just
have to make that sacrifice, David. I know you hate that.
We'll have to work with
story,
this,
but you'll just have to sacrifice. Go ahead with it.
Forgive me this, but when the story came out that night on Thursday, he gave an interview to TV Newser, where he said, called me the usual liar, gutter snipe, blah 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 blah. But he said that I deserve to be put, quote, into the kill zone. This is imagine, let's do that sort of special effects, the harp sound. Imagine another scenario in which Anderson Cooper said of Bill O'Reilly, he deserves to be in the kill zone.
Yeah.
What do you think the reaction at Fox News and amongst the conservative media and the conservative world at large would have been?
Yeah.
They would have demanded that Anderson either apologize, renounce, or be fired for saying that. Yet O'Reilly said that, and Fox News doesn't blink an eye. No one there, no other host, nobody there says peep about it. And in some ways, it doesn't even cause much of a firestorm.
Yeah, but David, just to play devil's advocate and put a benign reading on his kill zone remark, you got to remember that in his mind, there's a pretty fine line between a kill zone and an unruly protest in Buenos Aires.
Yes.
So maybe what he meant is, if David Corn would go to an unruly protest in Buenos Aires and walk a mile in my shoes, he'd understand how I became a pathological liar. Now, what's wrong with that?
I'm sure that's exactly what was in his heart at the time.
Yeah.
Thanks for clearing this up, Robert. Wright.
I'm always able to see all sides of an issue, David, unlike some people in the liberal media.
Yes.
So, now, do you have a view on whether his misstatements were conscious or unconscious? And for that matter, in the Brian Williams case. I wrote a piece on Brian Williams. I tend to favor explanations about unconscious cognitive bias. I think a lot more of it happens unconsciously. And we know that memory is this very malleable thing. Do you have a view on whether he has been consciously lying or...
That is such a good question. I know you've written and studied, cognitive issues for years, and so you're a few pages ahead of me in this book. I don't know. I don't know whether he believes that he was in a war zone. I don't know if he, if he just really believes his very slim argument that unruly protests can be in Buenos Aires can be considered a war zone in the Falklands. I don't know if he once he gets caught, if he, conflates, memory into a false statement into a real memory because it makes it easier to defend. Mm-hmm. It's really, I mean, I do know that in this instance, unlike what Brian Williams did when Brian said, that was my memory. I don't know how it came out this way. I don't know how it developed it. I had a mismemory. Bill O'Reilly is not claiming that he...
Well, it's because he's not even acknowledging that there's a discrepancy between what he said and what happened.
He's not saying, this, I may have remembered it wrong or anything. And the issue, some, of those wonderful conservative tweeters who come to my Twitter timeline once in a while keep, raising the issue. Well, why are you harassing him over what he might have remembered about something that happened 30 years ago? It's not really about what happened 30 years ago. It's in the recent years, including after the Boston Marathon bombing, he has repeated this story. And he keeps saying it over and over again. So I'm not putting him on the spot and saying, what do you remember from 30 years ago? How come you can't remember it correctly? It's the way he has told the story again and again, often to what seems to be an obvious purpose at the time, to demonstrate that he's a battle-hardened combat guy. He can empathize with people, with soldiers who have been in the field. He can empathize with a courageous Boston Globe photographer taking pictures in the midst of the chaos after the horrific Boston Marathon bombing. And so, I mean, it's, he's used these stories to tell his viewers something about himself.
That's true. Now, I do think these distortions, even when they have a clear kind of tactical purpose like that, can be unconscious. In fact, the general unconscious tendency is we kind of glorify ourselves, we put ourselves closer to the action, closer to important people, and blah, blah, blah. These are tendencies in memory reconstruction. However, and I wrote a piece for the New Republic arguing that in Brian Williams' case, seems pretty plausible that's what happened, at least in the case of the helicopter thing. But I would note, if I were you, I might get one of these people who are experts in telling when somebody's lying. There's actually somebody famous, and have them who escapes my mind. But there are these people, I think they maybe testify in court, and have them look at the videotape, because I noticed something interesting when he says...
a tell?
What? I think there's a tell. I mean, there may be. I'm not an expert. But if you look at it, he says, when I was in a war... and he kind of looks to the side zone. It's the way, it can mean one of two things. You're really trying to recollect, or one of those things where you're starting to distort things and you're kind of having trouble making eye contact or something. It's really, take a look. Have an expert look.
I remember years ago reading that if people look up when they're answering a question, it's an indication of some misrepresentation. I don't know if that's at all true, but I read it somewhere sometime.
It's right between the word war and zone. It's almost like saying, well, now how can I war? I don't know. Take a look. It's interesting. But beyond that, I have nothing to contribute to your ongoing investigation. But is more stuff coming out?
I'm looking at some other stuff I've heard from other reporters. And let me just also, we bashed, the media, the big bad media a little bit earlier. I meant to do it then, and it slipped my addled brain, so let me do it now. I really want to say that CNN has not followed that pattern that you and I described earlier. Brian Stelter there, who's their media reporter, and several other folks immediately, looked at the work we did, got on the phone, started calling other CBS people. I had spoken to some who had been down in Buenos Aires, and they developed the story further. They got several people, I think 7 altogether, 3 or 4 on the record and 3 or 4 off the record, who all said that Bill O'Reilly's story wasn't true, and that the story which he told, which is while he was at that protest, well, first once he said he did it in the Falklands, and other times he said he did it at the protest, of saving a cameraman who had been knocked to the ground and was bleeding from the ear and the head, was not true at all, in the sense that they said nobody here remembers any major injury from that night, and we all would have, because that's exactly the type of thing you sit around and discuss once you're back in the hotel after you've sent in your tape. So I talked to one cameraman who was down there, a part of the CBS crew, who said it didn't happen. So CNN found Eric Engberg and who was a veteran correspondent there, And they did additional reporting, and they actually advanced the story. That was heartening and encouraging to see, and they've stayed on this story.
Yeah. How'd you like your experience on the Hugh Hewitt show, David?
Oh, I had a negative experience with him some time back.
Yeah.
And
I had one too, but it wasn't as negative as yours was this time. But.
And so this time around, it was actually, believe it or not, Joe Walsh, the former congressman, now conservative talk show host, who loves most of all freedom.
See the guy who said you lied, or
something? Was he the one? No, he said something. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, he was a Tea Party candidate. I think he survived only one term in the House, and now is on the radio. Anyway, he's one of these odd Twitter friends that we all have. Probably says the same thing about me. And after the story came out, he had some interesting tweets about how this could be an issue for O'Reilly. This piece is solid. There's some real stuff to deal with here. And was one of the few conservatives to, address the article seriously. I as a tangent, I know we hate tangents on Blogging Heads.
No, we live by tangents on blogging. Tangents are Blogging Heads. Go ahead.
As a tangent, I actually thought when the piece came out that there would be some in the conservative media who would look at the reporting and the evidence and and evaluate it with some, maybe with a little bit of a perspective, but with some, degree of fairness. But anyway, Joe, was tweeting at me about this, that it seemed fair. And then, Hugh Hewitt, got involved and had O'Reilly on the show. And Joe said, that's all happening on Twitter, which is where everything happens these days, that, I should go on the show. And he said, yeah, I'm sure Hugh will be fair this time. And I had some messages with Hugh, and I said I wanted to be straight shooting and fair. Recalling what happened last time, and he promised me, sure. And I said, okay, we'll do 30 minutes. And
that's hilarious that he said that in light of what actually happened. That he assured you he played straight. But go ahead.
Yeah, I said no shouting, no this, and whatever. And then we went on the show, and he just started again, with like, what do you think about Alger Hiss? Can you tell me how you got a Phi Beta Kappa? And
that was the first question. Was Alger Hiss guilty or innocent?
And what is what's your motive here? Did you work for Fox between 2001 and 2008? And yeah, I did. And when I was on O'Reilly's show a couple of times, he often praised me. Great guest. We love having you on. Good reporter.
Right.
And I wasn't much of a liar or a gutter snipe for those 7 years. Now was I? But he just kept digging into these side shows, into real tangents, and I kept saying, let's talk about the evidence in the piece. And it became a bit of a shouting match, and I threatened to walk off a few times and or hang up. There was no place to walk from. I was sitting right here at the time, and but we I soldiered on, and I tried to get to the point, and every once in a while he did veer into the realm of relevancy. And so I kept thinking, well, maybe we can stay here, and then we'd go back to Alger Hiss.
I didn't get to that part. I bailed out earlier, but I'm glad it happened.
Or what happened, whether I could remember correctly how I got my Phi Beta Kappa award at Brown University 30 years ago. And I get trying to tell him this, what's happening with O'Reilly is not a memory issue. He doesn't claim that there's a memory issue here. He claims that he said everything accurately. So in any event, after about 45 minutes, when he started going back to Phi Beta Kappa or back to Alger Hiss, and he started saying, asking me whether, about my Polk Award and whether I thought it was courageous journalism, for which I was, and he started veering back into all that. I said, now I am going to hang up. I mean, I probably threatened 6 or a dozen or 13,000 times before that. But, and I had given him 45 minutes. We agreed on 30, and it just seemed, and I said, what, I think we've gone around on this as much as we're going to. And he just kept going, rather than saying, okay, thank you for being on the show, he just kept asking the same questions. Yeah. So I said, goodbye, I hate to do this, I'm hanging up. Quick.
That was after like 45 minutes. I mean, it was interesting. It made me think about kind of tribal psychology, and I want to emphasize that I'm not of the view.
Well, let me just back one other point that was important.
Yeah.
In all this was he had O'Reilly on Friday, and I kept asking him, Did you question his credibility? Did you question his motives? They said, they try to impugn my motives because Fox ended my contract at a time when they told me they were ending contracts for a lot of commentators. And actually, it was a pretty damn good thing for me because I then started negotiating with CNN. That didn't pan out, but I soon got a gig at MSNBC that I've been very happy with. But in any event, he kept trying to impugn my motive that this was revenge because 6-7 years ago, they had ended my contract with other people. Well, I kept saying, well, did you do this with O'Reilly? Did you ask him what is his motive for saying he didn't lie? Does he want to protect his job and and his salary, which I think is a little bit bigger than mine? You want to ask questions about his credibility, about things he said in the past that other people have challenged as wrong? I mean, he didn't do that. So that was part of my, my anger or disappointment.
Yeah, well, it was, this is what I was going to say was, it was just kind of so transparent that he wasn't interested in addressing the issues. Hugh Hewitt, and was interesting this is what I was saying about tribal psychology, and what I was going to say was, I'm not of the view that right-wing tribal psychology is uniquely bizarre. I think the left-wing tribal psychology is a more or less comparable specimen, maybe with some differences. But I'm thinking, like, how can somebody listening to this show think that this host, no matter what your ideological persuasion, is actually here to address the issues? It's really bizarre. And I've been on Hugh Hewitt's show, and there was kind of an ambush of me of a different sort, but it was much more like legitimate. It was like a pretty legitimate ambush, actually. And
that's so nice of you to concede that.
No, it's like he got a real expert on the subject I had written a book about to try to find something that I had gotten a little wrong, and then they just hammered it home. But it was relevant to my expertise.
Yeah,
and
unlike Alger Hiss or your Phi Beta
Kappa.
Right,
he didn't ask me Alger Hiss. But I'm thinking, it's just interesting that this works for him. He knows what works for him.
Yeah,
and he can bring, and people should really listen to the first 10 minutes. It borders on the bizarre. He's clearly not interested in addressing the issue. He's trying to undermine your credibility in the most oblique, almost incomprehensible ways. But it must be working for him, and he must know it, and it's just some kind of tribute to the power of tribal psychology, I guess.
Well, believe it or not, I got more than a few tweets from people who are his listeners claiming that he had totally eviscerated me and had proven
that's what I mean.
that my motives, had dictated the story, and he had shown me to be a complete liar. When we did it, when he didn't, Hugh did not challenge a single fact in the story.
Yeah.
A single fact about what we said, about what the story reported about Bill O'Reilly. It didn't, he didn't, say, well, maybe, and he didn't say, well, when you meant this, when he meant that, could he have meant this? Are you being too semantical or whatever? I've done my own research, and I found actually, if you look at the full quote, it doesn't say that. There was none of that.
Yeah.
It was all about impeaching, I would say, attacking me. But yet, the way it went over with his audience, if I can judge from the troll patrol that came out afterwards, it was all rather effective for them. That's kind of sad.
What was the point of the Alger Hiss thing? Had you said long ago that you thought Alger Hiss was innocent or something?
I don't know. I think he does he want liberals to admit it or acknowledge something that is an article of faith for the right? I just kept saying as you listened that I think this is irrelevant. I just didn't want to play the game. I don't really have much of a view or opinion about Alger Hiss. I don't care. I know it's been a controversy. I know it's come up and people claim that the Venona papers prove the case conclusively. I never read the Venona papers because I don't care. But he kept doing this odd thing. Well, Cass Sunstein says this is the most important question of all time. Do you agree with Cass Sunstein? No, I don't. Maybe the most important question of all time is should FDR have bombed the concentration camps where they were killing Jews earlier, in the war when John McCloy didn't want him to do that? Maybe the most important question of all time is, did someone else kill Kennedy? There are lots of the most important question of all time. What we should do about poverty and help, the millions of Americans who go to bed hungry. I can think of at least 6 questions that might be more important than this one.
He disagreed. It was the one case where it wasn't even quite clear to me what he was getting at. But I guess he was hoping you'd say Alger Hiss was innocent, damn it, and you could spend an hour on that.
Yeah, I just saw it as irrelevant and a word game. And ultimately, I don't blame Hugh Hewitt. This is really like the scorpion and the frog. Yeah. People can Google it, so I don't have to tell the story again. And because I'd had a bad experience with him in the past, he said he'd be different. Joe Walsh, our mutual Twitter pal, said you can trust him on this, David. Afterwards, Joe Walsh said that it wasn't fair and that it wasn't that Hugh had not treated me fairly. So my hat's off. Probably the one thing that Joe Walsh and I will ever agree on. But it's like, what did George Bush say? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, won't get fooled again.
You're in the phase.
Fool me twice, shame on me. I've learned my lesson. I don't think I'll go on the Hugh Hewitt show again. Unless, of course, he's willing to pay me a lot of money.
I don't think that's his business model.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Not as much as I get paid at Blogging Heads, that's for damn sure.
But we treat you a lot better because we're part of the liberal media.
Of course.
We're actually not, but I won't go into that.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you, David. Anything else in Washington generally? You want any pressing issues?
No, I just need to ask because I know other viewers will. Is your ear okay? What's up?
So you can see that, huh?
Yeah,
I got a lecture from the doctor yesterday is what happened. I had surgery, minor surgery. It was in the inside of the ear. And anyway, yesterday she told me I had not been dressing the wound as she had told me, which is totally true.
Yes.
And as a result, it might get infected and I might die and it might not heal properly. But it's like on the inside of my ear. She's like talking about the cosmetics of it healing properly. It's on the inside of my ear and I'm already married. It's like I'm worried about the cosmetics of this thing. But nonetheless, I'm following her advice. I'm following her advice so that I will have an attractive interior ear for the rest of my life. And I apologize.
You never know when you'll need an attractive inner ear, but I would be a little bit more concerned, as I am for your well-being, about the infection issue. So
yeah. No, she got my attention with that.
Keep it clean, Robert.
She got my attention with the infection leads to death explanation thing.
Well, the inner ear is pretty close to the inner brain.
No, it's not. It's inner ear is the wrong term. It's skin inside the ear that you anyway. I think we probably spent at least as much time on my ear as the average viewer was hoping to hear at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah.
And so I just want to thank you. Where can people follow you on Twitter? Your Twitter following is probably doubled in the last week. It was already at like half a million.
I don't think so. But David Corn DC is my Twitter handle. And really, for the few conservatives out there who might be watching and want to think that the story is not solid, please just do me the courtesy of going to motherjones.com. and find it and read it yourself. It really won't take a lot of time.
Read it and watch the one videotape. With the photographer. It's like that alone tells you there's an issue. I'm not saying it's like the biggest issue in the world, but I just wish people would get clear on like the facts, and I'm sure you do too. So thank you, David, and we'll see you next time you orchestrate a brouhaha.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay, see you.